Welcome to another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Today we're going to talk about my 1972 Mercedes-Benz 6.3. Well, I want to prove to you that we read the comment section. A while back we did a piece about all the projects we had going on here at the garage, and I mentioned that I was a bit of a dilemma. I bought this car 5, 6, 7, well, probably 7 years ago now, and it had 300,000 miles on it. It ran fine. And I had managed to obtain the drivetrain from an SLS Mercedes and the gearbox and the whole deal. And I was going to transplant that into this car. But in the interim, I realized, well, this car has a value of its own. It's a unique car. It's a collector car. And I asked you guys, should I restore it or put the modern drivetrain in and sort of resto mod it, but still keeping it Mercedes? Overwhelmingly, you said, no, you got to keep it stock. So that's what I've done, and I'm glad I did that. When I was a kid, I worked at a place called Foreign Motors in Boston on Commonwealth Avenue. And we had all kinds of foreign cars. We had Citroën, we had Rolls-Royce, we had Bentley, but primarily Mercedes-Benz. And up until about 1968, Mercedes-Benz, well, they've always had the reputation that Mercedes-Benz have, but the biggest engine was a 6-cylinder. And they were not known to be particularly powerful cars. Nice driving cars, incredible build quality. They just didn't have that American V8 oomph. Well, around the same time, actually a few years earlier, 1963, Mercedes-Benz developed this car. We talked about this car on the website a while back. This is the Mercedes 600. This was the only car ever built by Mercedes-Benz to be a money, no object car. We wanted to build the best car we could. Whatever it cost, that's what it cost. And they developed this 6.3-liter overhead cam V8 fuel injection with 300 horsepower, which was incredible at the time. And those are German horses with a 4-speed automatic transmission, but it weighed about 3 tons. But it was still just about the fastest thing in Mercedes-Benz lineup. This car was faster than the SL, it was faster than anything they had. And with the air suspension and the design work into it, it handled pretty well. Well, then there was a guy named Eric Waxenberger. I hope I'm saying that correct. That's probably an American version of a German name. Waxley, they called him. He was one of those Mercedes engineers guys. He was a real sports car guy, and he thought, why not take this engine and put it in something smaller? You know, using the John DeLorean theory of taking the big engine from the Pontiac Grand Prix and putting it into the smaller car. Well, that's what he did. But he did it in secret because nobody at Mercedes-Benz thought it would sell. They didn't think it would be popular. So using a sort of, well, his own time and his own sort of project budget, he had kind of squirreled some money away to do this project. He took the big engine from here and put it into this smaller Mercedes-Benz. And the nice thing about this car is, especially in the 60s, although it was bigger than a Mustang or a Camaro, it was still smaller than a full-size Galaxy or a Chrysler Imperial or a Cadillac. So this was a real supercar, a German supercar. As I said, you now had 300 horsepower and the 4-speed gearbox and the disc brakes and everything, but in a car weighing about 3,800 pounds versus 6,000 pounds. And that made this pretty much a rocket ship, at least compared to the 60s. This car was faster than the 911, faster than the BMWs, faster than the Isa Revoltas or any of those cars. Even faster, I believe, than a few Ferraris. 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds, which is just about what the Hemi Belvedere Chrysler did. I've got a 66 Coronet over there with a Hemi engine in it, and that was about 6.5. So the advantage to this one was it actually stopped and went around corners. You had the air suspension from this. You had the, for the time, luxurious leather interior, real wood dash, 4-speed gearbox that shifts like bang, bang, bang. I mean, it's pretty good. Eric Waxenberg took this car, and then he gave it to Rudolf Uhlenhaut. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's the guy that developed the famous SLR, and he was the real high-performance Mercedes-Benz guy. And Eric went roaring past his office, and he came out, what's this, you know? And Eric said, here, take it for a ride. So he took it for a ride and just was so impressed by the power. He actually pulled over to stoplight to open the hood to see what was in it. He couldn't believe how much power it was. That's when they gave the go-ahead to build these. They thought maybe they'd sell 50. Well, the response was overwhelming, especially from America. This car sold for about $14,400, about $16,000 by 1972, which was an incredible amount of money. That was probably equal to and a little bit more than a lot of Ferraris. In the whole 4-year run of this car, they built 6,526. They've become a cult car. And when I was a kid and when I worked at Mercedes-Benz, I thought this was the greatest car in the world. Still do. It's still my favorite Mercedes-Benz to drive. I love this body style. I love the stacked headlights. I like the fact that it's what the British call a Q-ship. It's the most unassuming car you can imagine. It just looks like a Mercedes-Benz, any Mercedes-Benz, except that 6.3 emblem in Germany had the same appeal to young men as the famous Hemi badge on the side of a Plymouth or a Coronet. As I said before, 4-wheel disc brakes, leather interior, central locking. You press this, you see the all-4 lock, and it locks the trunk, which is not a big deal now because even Corollas have that. But back in the 60s and 70s, that was a real luxury item. They came standard with air conditioning, at least in America, tachometer. And these engines were under stress. You know, Mercedes-Benz went racing with these, and they were revving them to $8,000 and getting all kinds of horsepower out of them. But for the American market, the 300 horsepower, they're pretty bulletproof. This car now has, what, 327,000 miles on it, and it's still going. The air suspension still works fine. Everything works fine until it breaks. And then, oh my God, it's like crazy money. Yeah, if you're going to get one of these, buy the best one you can, because they are expensive to repair. But that's okay. That's okay. Let's take a look under the hood and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now bear in mind, this car has not been restored. We're going to restore it. I just bought it as a driver thinking the engine was going to break and wear out, and I put a new motor in it. Well, I think it must have hurt me because this thing just keeps running and running and running. As you can see, single overhead cam on each bank. You know, there's a great road test by Don Garlix, the famous drag racer, the Swamp Rat, one of our heroes. Has all kinds of interesting features. I remember there was a, where's the switch Don was concerned about? He couldn't figure out what it did, and then he realized that, oh, every time the hood went up, the fan shut off, so the mechanic didn't cut his fingers or hurt himself when he was working on the car. It's a big engine, and boy, it's crammed in there. And it's not a lightweight engine. It weighs about 700 pounds. But he was just amazed that this car could run 100 to 125 miles an hour all day long. In 2002, I was fortunate enough to drive the Firebird pace car at Daytona. And they brought out all the old Firebirds to take around the track. And I took out the, oh, you know, the one with the big chicken on the hood, the 455. We couldn't get it over 112 on the straight in Daytona because it just didn't have the power. This thing runs 140 miles an hour. The rear end ratio is 2.85. So to turn a quarter mile in the 14s, that was pretty impressive. It still pulls like no other Mercedes-Benz that I've ever driven. See, I don't know whether this is me reflecting back on my youth and just being blown away by this car at a time when I never could have afforded it. So I suppose there's a lot of nostalgia in there for me as well. You know, I only paid $5,000 for this car because the people I got it from thought it was just going to wear out and break anytime soon. That was 7 years ago. I've done nothing to it. It leaks a little transmission fluid. The seals, it sat for a long time. The seals dried out. I just put some Transex in there to see if the seals will swell up a little bit, and maybe it will. But it doesn't overheat. The air conditioner works. It's just an unbelievable automobile. You know, I get so much pleasure from driving it. It's the perfect size to me. Modern cars seem they seem big and wide and long, whereas this thing seems really compact. The doors are really thin. I love the thin steering wheel. Come on, let's take it for a ride. You know, I remember the car magazines from the 60s and 70s like they were yesterday. Road and Track said this was merely the best sedan in the world. Not one of the best in the world. They emphasized that. The best in the world, because there was no car that could do what this car could do. There were cars that were faster, and there were cars that handled better, but there weren't cars that, when you put all the combination together, was better than this. You know, back when I worked for Mercedes-Benz, they didn't bring the car to the dealership on transporters. We had to fly down to Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, and pick them up as they came off the boat and drive them back to Massachusetts. And I remember being on I-95 in these things, running 95 to 120 miles an hour, trying to get back to Boston in under 2 hours. Yeah, it was pretty exciting. That was my favorite part of the job, driving these cars back from Port Elizabeth, New Jersey. Being 22 years old and driving the fastest sedan in the world, that was a lot of fun. Spent the night in jail one night in Roanoke, Virginia. I got flagged at 128 at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I got taken to the judge's house, and just like in a movie, the judge came out in his pajamas and sat down in front of a desk and hit a gavel and fined me, and I could either spend a week in jail or pay the fine. I had cash in my sock, I paid the fine, and I kept going. The modern equivalent of this car might be something like the Charger Hellcat, a four-door with 707 horsepower that looks like a regular car until you put your foot in it. It's fun just to walk away from lesser cars. I'd love to hear from people in the comment section if they've ever driven a 6.3. See, I don't know how much of my love for this car is nostalgia, because it brought back a period of my life when I was dead broke and I got to drive some of the fastest cars in the world, or whether it really is what I feel it is. I'm not sure what the ratio is today, but when this car was built, at Mercedes-Benz on the assembly line, 1 out of every 11 employees was an inspector to make sure the car was built correctly. Although this was one of the best handling cars, certainly the best handling European sedan in the 60s, it's still a 50-year-old car, and suspension's come a long way. You know, when I go up the canyons and that rear wheel lifts, that tire just breaks loose and spins, so you have to be a little bit careful. The air suspension is nice, but of course it's no match for what a modern Mercedes-Benz could do. You don't want to drive this car fast, you just want to drive it swiftly. That being said, driving at 10 or 20 miles above the speed limit, it's still supremely comfortable. And I love that it just looks like an old Mercedes. But this leather, I mean, this leather is the original leather to the car. 325,000 miles, and it still looks good. I'd see it goes pretty good, but this is not this car's natural environment. This car likes to be on the Autobahn, or the closest we have here in LA, the 210 freeway. Come on, we'll take it up there. This is where this car lives, on the open road like this. No more getting blown off by GTOs and 442s. You put your foot in it and you're out of there. I just like the mechanicalness of this car. No computers. You know, steering is hydraulic. Air suspension. This 4-speed gearbox, a lot of people didn't like it because it shifted so abruptly. But I kind of like that kick in the pants feel you get from it. You know, there's a wonderful club for these cars. There's a 6.3 club. They have classifieds. You can buy cars from club members because that's someone that's taken care of the vehicle and cherished it. You might pay a little bit more, but you'll know you're getting a driver's car, because people that have these like to drive them. You know, although Road and Track called this the best sedan in the world, it still was not without its problems. One was this air conditioning unit, nowhere near up to the standard of American units from General Motors or Ford. It tends to sweat a little bit, and it's really noisy. Listen. I don't know if you can pick that up, but see how noisy it is? But that's what you had to, that was German air conditioning. And prior to this, most was a unit that would hang down here. So this was one of the first ones, German ones at least, to have all the air conditioning integrated into the dashboard. It works, it's just really noisy. The car also has no outside adjustment for the rear view mirror. This is a car you tend to run with the air conditioner on, the windows up. And most American cars, you can go like this to adjust the mirror. This one, you had to put the window down and put your hand outside. Boo-hoo, I had to put my hand outside. Ooh, it's really not that big a problem. Of course, nowadays you have a big airbag here, but back in the day, this was a safety feature from Mercedes-Benz. Besides the collapsible steering column, you had this was sort of would take some of the, well, I guess some of the impact and spread it out over, rather than puncture your chest, this would absorb it. That was the idea behind it. That's real wood on the dashboard. That's a real piece of wood in the glove box. I love that part of it. Here's your heater and defroster up here. Punk radio, of course, they were the best back in the day. You got your speedometer right here, goes to 160 miles an hour. Tachometer is dead center. You have your fuel gauge, your oil pressure, your oil and water temperature rather. Clock over here. And assorted buttons for the lighting and whatnot. Another complaint Road and Track had was the car did not have an electric power seat. I like a manual power seat. To me, that seems like a specious argument, because when I get in a car, I set the seat to where I want it, and it stays that way for the rest of my life. I don't let a lot of people drive my car, so having electronic adjustments and having 30 or 40 pounds worth of motor to move my buttocks 2 feet one way or the other seems like a ridiculous amount of wasted energy and wasted space. I love the leather of these old Mercedes. Look how thick it is. I mean, this is 50 years old. This is like armchair den. You know, an armchair you'd have in your den. This is the kind of heavy leather. I was always disappointed with that later leather they went to. Another complaint Mercedes had was there was no vanity mirror, but you could put your own in, as this one did. Had a great sunroof. Take a look at that. Good day, Mr. Bond. Coming up Route 95, 110 miles an hour with the sunroof open. Nothing more exciting than that. And this is a car that's just planted. You know, you get on the road and boom, it's just dead straight. No wallowing, no going up and down. Just fantastic. And you can see the horses in front of us, but like a bad commercial. With our Mercedes four-wheel disc brakes, we stop like that. I was never a big fan of this weeny little shifter. That always seemed like something a bit more manly, you know, to grip with your hand, but that's okay. In some ways, these were more primitive, especially when it came to heating and air conditioning in American cars. Can you see that big blower down there? Some of it is kind of primitive, you know, whereas an American car would have the heating and everything under the dashboard. See how the big blower motor just bolted to the side of the fender there? And the electric window switches look kind of like something out of the J.C. Whitney catalog from the 60s. That all being said, I don't know many cars that could take this kind of abuse and mileage and still have everything work. That's what I love about this car. Everything still works on it, you know? I always like these. Especially if you smoked, you're very European, just flick the ashes out, start a forest fire, you know. Now maybe it's me, but that three-pointed star in the hood seems so much more prominent to me in these older Mercedes than it does in the newer ones. You know, that's when it, I don't know, it just, boy, it's right there, it's right in your face. Just makes it look like a real quality piece. In the air suspension, much like the Citroën we did a while back, you can raise or lower this. You know, for inclement weather or snow, you can bring the suspension up to the highest level. And then when you get down on the freeway, it kind of hunkers down a little bit. The success of the 6.3 and the demand was so great, it made Mercedes-Benz realize, hey, we need to have some V8s. So quickly they came out with the 3.5 and the 4.5, two other great motors. But this is the one that started it all. And my friend Carl Middelhoff, I talked about him in the video we did on the 600. He is an expert in these cars. He can get 500, 600, 700 horsepower out of them. Yeah, so it's, maybe I'll have him do one of my motors someday. I better hurry, he's 80-something years old. I get a little driveline vibration You know, I was going to pull my drive shaft out and get it balanced, but then I read a couple of the road tests, and that seems to be a common problem with these cars. So if the factory couldn't fix it, I'm not going to mess with it. You know, as I said before, you've got to see these automobiles in the time period to which they live. You know, it's like fighters, like Muhammad Ali or whatever. Oh, this guy could have beat that guy. You can only live in the time you live in. And when this was built, it was the fastest four-door sedan in the world. People would take them to drag strips and would only get beaten by, you know, maybe big block Chevys or Hemi cars. That was sort of the amazing thing. And people did thousands and thousands of trouble-free miles in these cars. To me, this is the car that really made Mercedes-Benz reputation in America. Okay, besides the Gullwing from the 50s. But this, to me, was a pretty good successor to the Gullwing. Remember, this car came really just maybe 12 or 14 years after the Gullwing. But it's a fun story how the whole car came to be. As I said, Google Mercedes-Benz 6.3, read the article on Don Garlitz and his car and Car and Drivers, written by one of my favorites, Brock Yates. And go to the Mercedes-Benz Club website. They'll give you all the information you need. You know, driving this thing brings back so many memories to me. I remember I was delivering one of these, and I stopped at McDonald's to get something to eat, you know. And I'm putting the ketchup on my hamburger like this as I'm creeping forward in traffic, and I bumped the lady in front of me, and the burger goes like this. It sticks to my face. And I'm so worried I damaged the car. I run out to look at the damage. Woman gets out, looks at my face, and screaming, think I've been horribly disfigured because I had this bloody patty stuck in my face. And I said, no, I'm not her. It's just a hamburger. She goes, a hamburger? Why's a hamburger stuck in your face? Yeah, it took some explaining to do. Yeah, I know, it's stupid. Anyway, listen, I hope you enjoyed this trip as much as I did. If you ever get a chance to drive one of these cars, boy, just take it. They're just really wonderful, wonderful automobiles. And it's really a passion thing for me. I hope it is for you too. We'll see you guys next week. Oh, and keep commenting in the comment sections. We enjoy reading them, and we listen to you. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Mm-hmm.